can sometimes feel like the whole world is against us, or there's me and there's everyone else. And those others, they're a threat to me. And I need to protect myself. I need to look after myself, and often how that comes out, how that manifests is through me pushing people away, let's say, or trying to control others through actions of speech or actions of body, telling people you're wrong, I'm right. My opinion is right because it's coming from a place of certainty. Because obviously I'm the most certain about my own views, and yours is wrong because it's deluded. Your view's wrong. And this is natural, and it's a habit that's been going on in humanity for eons. And it's rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion. So the delusion that we are all separate, substantial selves, and everyone else is an other. And because of that delusion, I need to protect myself. So this is where the greed and hatred comes in. And I protect myself by trying to get more things to protect myself, or push things away that are threatening. And it's tricky because often that process, it can feel like we're on the side of good. It's like, oh yeah, I can see that there's division in the world, but in this instance, I'm speaking from a place of open-hearted connection. I'm speaking from a place of love. I've had an awakening experience, for instance. I've heard a lot of this kind of narrative recently, like, I've awakened and therefore I see clearly, and what you're saying is deluded, therefore I need to tell you why it's deluded and what's wrong and how wrong you are and all the harm you're doing and all these kind of things. And yeah, it's really, it's problematic, that kind of view of the world, that kind of being in the world. It is, what would you call it? It's divisional, it's confrontational, it's conflictual. It is separate, it is dualistic, it is not in line with the truth of awakening that a lot of us are looking to open to. And that truth is that we are not separate, we are not two. So what we experience together. But that's a challenge, isn't it? So the challenge with that truth is that when things impact me from apparent others, instead of the usual default of defending against it and trying to fight the other person through words, or even just, a lot of the time it's just thoughts, isn't it? We just go, I'm going to think about this forever and I'm going to create an enemy in my mind. But instead of doing that, if we're going to rest in the truth of non-separation, then we need to open our hearts to what's going on. And that is, everybody's really just trying to get on and live a life of happiness, really. It's not happening necessarily, but people are only doing what they do because they think it's good and they think it's right. They're not trying to damage themselves and damage the world necessarily. That people are reacting to life in a way that they think is going to give them safety and security and well-being. And then when we feel that, we recognize, actually these reactions and these actions, it's not personal. It's nobody's fault as such. This is the momentum of a world mired in mind identification, in the delusion of self. It operates through the lenses of greed, hatred and delusion, and it perpetuates suffering in the world. This is kind of how the mind-identified world goes. So if we're going to look for peace in our own life, let's say, we're going to try and find lasting peace and satisfaction in our own life, then we need to recognize when that reactive habit of, I would call it enmity, but the making enemies of, bad othering is another term I've heard by Tara Brach, which I really like. But just that process of going, oh no, they're wrong, I'm right. I'm on the side of good, you're on the side of bad, and I'm going to tell you why it's bad. We need to catch that as it arises, because ultimately it will never lead to freedom. It is a false promise, that movement. And the false promise is that there can be safety by attaching to a fixated viewpoint and opposing an other. It's like, oh no, I can be right in this argument. And by being right, maybe publicly, then I win and I get some kind of safety. But that's all dualism, isn't it? It's all dualistic. It's not in line with the truth that we're looking to open to on the path of awakening, through the non-dual realization, through, you could call it enlightenment, but enlightenment is the enlightening of the way things are. This process of awakening is to see clearly the non-separate nature of all of this. And making enemies, which always happens up here, by the way, it's always up here, it's always us making the enemy of other. And it's not to say that things aren't happening to us. Life isn't unfolding in a certain way and it isn't hurting. It is. I get it. I've been hurt many times in the past. But the making the enemy and the perpetuation of enmity is always here. It's always the mind, our mind, making a bad other and then projecting our views onto that other, our hurt onto that other, because it gives the illusion that I'm going to get something out of it, I'm going to get safety. But what all there is more conflict, more division, more delusion, more duality, and more striving, actually. Because if we start to hold a view that is in opposition to someone else's view, let's say, and we hold it strongly, then we have to fight to defend that view. And it can be really difficult. Well, it is really difficult because it's not in line with the way things are. It's not in line with the truth of non-separation and impermanence. The fact that these thoughts and views that I'm trying to fix, they just naturally come and go, and they're not discreetly real and true in themselves. So if you find yourself making enemies in the world, if you find yourself driven to speak out strongly about the hardships in the world through enmity, I'm not saying that we can't communicate. We can communicate, and we should communicate, but we can communicate from the heart. And that heart acknowledges that we are in this together. We are not each other's enemy. This is a shared life, a shared experience. And it's difficult, for sure. It's difficult. And it's especially difficult when somebody does apparently harm us. We feel the harm of it. The challenge then is, how do I open my heart to the truth of that? The fact that that other person, the person that harmed me, is operating from delusive, mind-identified states of greed and hatred. They too are suffering, and they're trying to alleviate their suffering in the world through their actions, and those actions are causing harm. That's really challenging to open to, but that is what this path requires if we want to be free. If we want to be free of suffering, and if we want to share wisdom and compassion in the world, we need to face up to the truth of what's going on. And that is that most of the time, our enemies, our apparent enemies, are simply nothing other than our own thoughts.